Hello, everyone, and good evening. I'm sorry if anybody was waiting for us. We are just starting. We were just a little bit late. We had a closed session, one item to deal with first, so apologize for being a little bit late, but happy to welcome anybody who's here and council for our workshop tonight. And we're going to review the community planning permit bylaw and have this educational workshop. And I'm going to welcome Chris Cannon, our placemaker planner, and also Nick Scarrett, our development leader. And before we get started, gentlemen, I'd just like to ask, do you want questions throughout? Do you want to wait till the end of the presentation? How would you best like that?
Through your worship, I think it would be best if we left the questions to the end.
I think that'll be easier for me too, because I can't always see all of the Brady Bunch when the screen is up. So whenever you're ready, gentlemen.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, Deputy Mayor, members of council, staff, and members of the public. We appreciate this opportunity to give the Planning Services Department the opportunity to provide you with a procedural update on applications under review for the Community Planning Permit System Bylaw 06217. These items will be presented to you in the future, and there is a slide at the end of this presentation that will give you an indication of the number of applications that we have for this Class 1 permit system that we will bring before you. Just trying to change the slide. Thank you. The Community Planning Permit Bylaw was approved by Council on May 24th, 2017. The bylaw was given final approval by the LPAT on January 8th, 2019. The Shoreline Bylaw is meant to regulate the use of land and the character and location of buildings and structures for the promotion of ecologically sound and safe development along the Lake Simcoe shoreline. To help you with the shoreline bylaw, it's a 5-in-1 process. It includes vegetation removal on land and in water, site alteration, addition or removal of soil, building location setbacks, site plan control agreements, and committee of adjustment variations. Staff worked in close consultation with the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, the Lake Simcoe Conservation Authority, the County of Simcoe, Transportation Canada, and other municipal partners, and the development community to come up with policies that meet the town and their objectives to promote good and efficient development along the shoreline and in the water of Lake Simcoe. This process is essentially a one-window approach that seeks out the science in order to justify any application for development along the Lake Simcoe shoreline. I apologize, I went too far ahead. These objectives listed are the main objectives for the community planning permit system bylaw, which are to enhance and protect the natural features of Lake Simcoe shoreline while minimizing development impacts. Now I'll turn it over to Nick Scarrett for the remainder of the presentation.
Thank you, Chris. Next slide, please. Many of the applications contain Class 2 and Class 3 variations as part of the proposal that staff reviewed and processed through those levels. The Class 1 application that staff will be bringing before you contain recommendations that seek a yes and no answer to specific areas of the proposed development. We would like to ensure you these recommendations will be reviewed by professionals that are tasked to do so. Staff recommendations are required to consider all elements, like any application, will need to be able to be defended at the LPAT if required. Class 1 permits, unlike other development applications that you've seen in the past, there would be staff recommendations provided to council to consider, as well as the necessary material to make an informed decision. Class 1 permits inform the public of the development, and the public will have the opportunity to provide comments on the proposed Class 1 permit request. Next slide, please. Thank you. Council and staff have the authority within the bylaw to impose conditions of approval that the applicant is required to meet and are identified within the permit. Such conditions may include timing by which the development is required to take place, community benefits, additional plan submissions and restrictions on ensuring no habitable space or servicing is connected to certain structures. These are some examples of Class 1 permits that council will see in the near and foreseeable future. I want to draw your attention to boathouses. At the discretion of council at the May 2017 council meeting, all boathouses on land or in the water on Lake Simcoe, as well as rock groins, are subject to Class 1 permits and require decisions of council to approve if a boathouse or other discretionary uses is permitted on the subject site. For example, should an application for an in-water boathouse be applied for, it would automatically become a Class 1 permit and be subject to council's yes or no decision on the use. Staff and external agencies will provide comments which will be sent to council to help make an informed decision. The intention of the Shoreline bylaw was to permit in-water and on-land boathouses subject to additional regulations. However, at the May 2017 council meeting, an amendment was made by council to the boathouse section requiring them to be discretionary uses, which is why we're here today. The intention of the bylaw was always to permit boathouses, but at reduced sizes, greater setbacks, and restrictions. The role of council is to provide a yes or no decision on shoreline Class 1 permits. These applications are not like a zoning bylaw amendment where they can be deferred. Staff will provide relevant material in order to make a decision. A recommendation report will be submitted to council to render a decision, and council will have the opportunity to ask staff questions on the information provided within the report. Next slide, please. We note that staff are processing applications for boathouses, coverage of land by structures, and hot tub setbacks that will be bringing forward to council in the very near future. We thank you for your time and are open to any questions that you may have.
Thank you, gentlemen. Questions or comments? Councillor Van Berkel. You're on mute, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I read the entire bylaw, and I've got a lot of problems with this bylaw. You know, it's 108 pages. First of all, I've never seen a 108-page bylaw, and what I can see, it's like 8 pages of protect the shoreline and 100 pages of how to create a bureaucracy. and you know, to a way to permit permits at where people don't even know what it's going to cost. I mean, I can understand what we're doing here. I really do. But I mean, some of it says there we got up to 2 years. It says, you know, all these different steps. You know, all we're doing is, you know, we're punishing the people that pay the most taxes in this township when they want to do something. And I don't have a problem with a bylaw, you know, that protects Lake Simcoe. But I do have a bylaw when what it does is take our entrepreneurs that make a living on the shorelines doing these additions and whatever else. And when a $40,000 addition costs $35,000 in permits, it's not right. I mean, yeah, for developers, if you're going to put big developments or a big house or whatever, okay, we need to put in some proper bylaws and proper this, but this has gone, you know, there's a too far right and too far left. And I think this has gone way too far left. It's, you know, I hope that when this bylaw was enacted, that every person that pays taxes on the shoreline was given a registered letter and say, don't come to Innisfil for a building permit, because that's basically what you've done. You've shut it down. And I have a big problem with this. I get calls on this every day. Every single day I get calls on this, you know, where they want to do a small job. And I thought Innisfil was open for business, but they put these people through hell, the planning department and the building department. And there has to be a standard where, you know, there is an absolute price on it, what it's going to cost. It's got to be, there's a timeline got to be on it, because for a lot of this stuff that they want top walls and geotechs up for an addition on houses that have been there forever, that want to put in 3 or 4 piles, why do you need a geotech? We're not disturbing, you know, if you're going to dig, okay, fine. But you know, there's things that need to make common sense, and a lot of this doesn't make common sense. And I have a real problem, because I don't think anybody ever realized the consequences of this bylaw when it was put in. And another thing is, I don't think there's another bylaw like this anywhere around Lake Simcoe or around Georgian Bay or anywhere else, that we're, again, the first ones to do this. And at a time like today, with COVID-19, we need to bring business in here. We have to try and get our people working, not discourage them from coming to town for a building permit. And those are my comments.
Thank you, Councillor. I saw that Mr. Kane turned his video on. Did you want to comment on that, Mr. Kane? I think Mr. Kane might be frozen. Okay, we'll go to Councillor Arsati and then we'll come back.
Thank you, Your Worship. I know that we've just gotten a, you know, couple-minute clip of, as Councillor Van Berkel said, the 118 pages or whatever, I can't remember how many, that I went back over again yesterday and today. And it is the Class 1 permit requests that require council consideration. But I just had some problems with needing clarification in this long document or bylaw. The bylaw was put in place to prevent a lot of work went into this, and I appreciate that, and to have a standardization. But I had questions in the documents of 4.1.7, 4.117.2, that if council's making a consideration on some of these Class 1 permits, I'm glad to hear that staff are going to be including a report, because it's saying that council can vary the shoreline frontage by up to 50%, both on land and in water boathouses. So there's going to be a lot of discussion on that. And also in 4.117.1, that legal non-conforming buildings or structures erected prior to passing this that have been damaged or destroyed or demolished to the building will be restricted to the original footprint, location, building size, floor area, lot coverage, and height. Yet in 4.1.7.2, it says for the same ones, the legal non-conforming buildings or structures may be enlarged, subject to the planning permit class 2. So to me, this contradicts one to the other, and I just have a concern with how we're going to make decisions on some of this, and also being having these tight restrictions, and then council can make the decision to say, okay, we'll give you 50% more of what you want. I think there's got to be a lot more to it in restrictions.
So, okay, so the first question was about the contradiction. So did you want to get that one dealt with first, and then we'll go to that second one? Mr. Scarrett or Mr. Cannon?
Through you, Your Worship, to address Councillor Asadi's question. That section is a combination of information from the zoning bylaw that gave people those legal non-conforming permissions in the past. There's elements within the document that allow for people to vary those standards. So as noted earlier and within the document, this singular regulatory document is a 5-in-1 document, which also includes the Committee of Adjustment. The Committee of Adjustment process and all those other 5 processes that you would have to initially go through to get a building permit are now into one document, streamlining the process. In the legal non-conforming section, without going into great detail, allows flexibility of properties or cottages that have been in existence on the shoreline for some time to have the ability to develop their lands and provide for additions without having the restriction of a straight no. So that section is very important to our existing 1,200 plus properties on the shoreline that have the ability, that don't meet the current standards, to still develop their lands in accordance with the document and protection of the shoreline.
Okay, and then Councillor, did you want to deal with the one about the council discretion being so such latitude?
Yes, please.
Through you, Your Worship, those flexibilities within the document, the first one being a class 2 flexibility, is really, they would have to justify that. So going into the document, you would look at section 1.8 and 1.9 and see that people would have to provide justification of that flexibility. You don't have it as of right. That as of right flexibility must be justified through mediation of the shoreline, enhanced natural features, pushing back the development from the shoreline, all those kinds of flexibilities. Those flexibilities that you see with a class 1 permit and the 50% is just the next step. So if we're going to relate that back to something that council sees regulatorily, is zoning bylaw amendments. So that allows the flexibility to go up to 50% of the standard deviation, but that doesn't not necessarily say you're going to be granted that variance. So that would be in the report to council. For an example, if a boathouse was looking to expand up to 50% bigger than the standard, that would be a report to council, and they would have to justify that. Their planner would have to justify that, and the town's planner would provide a justification report to see if we were in support of that with the policies and regulations within the document. So it's just to cap that off, just because you see the 50% number there doesn't mean it's a silver platter and just serving it up that way. It has to be justified, and it is an extreme case.
Yes, and if I could just add to that, Councillor, and then I'll go back to you. If I'm not mistaken, we were dealing with this right around the same time that the Crescent Harbor Boathouse came. And that, I think that was part of the thought process of the former council to not allow any boathouses, because the first draft of this did allow boathouses to a certain extent. Am I right, Mr. Scarrett or Mr. Cannon?
Through you, Your Worship. Yes, there was some council deliberations to eliminate boathouses from the shoreline. that's how we came to where we're at today, as council has discretionary use for boathouses under the class 1. So all boathouses on land or in the water will be coming to council for your permission of the use, just to say yes, even if the boathouse meets all the standards. So if we have a reduced size, a single-story boathouse in the middle of the property, bigger setbacks, it still has to come to council, even though it meets the development standards within that section.
Yeah, and I can tell you that how that happened was we were in the process of developing the Our Shores plan when the one boathouse in question that was so controversial up in on Crescent Harbor, both landed on us at the same time, and that's how I think that's why this decision was made. And the other point that should be made is that if this Our Shores had have been already passed and through LPAT, that Crescent Harbor boathouse would not have been able to be built, or at least not the way it is going to be built. Mr. Scarrett, and then I'll get going to other people.
Through your worship, yes, that is correct. There's the standards from the zoning bylaw that were permitted for in-water and on-land boathouses allow more flexibility than the shoreline document. It has reduced the size of those boathouses, and that boathouse that you mentioned in question would not meet those standards. So if we project this document onto that scenario, it would be before council in the same manner as it was in the past.
Okay, I saw Councillor Arsadi had another one, and then Councillor Van Berkel will go back to you, and then Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, just as a follow-up, and you had touched on that, Your Worship, with the one on the Crescent Harbor, just the concern of the ones coming to council, that is to be a yes or no, that do have the flexibility of a 50% increase on land or water by council, just with the timeframes and how long that's going to be to, it's not a simple yes or no answer, it's usually a lot. And I'm just concerned with our past experience that how easily this is going to move through council.
Mr. Scarrett.
Through you, worship, to address Councillor Arsadi's question. This process, again, is a 5-in-1 document, and when applicants apply for a boathouse, they have to have all the necessary studies and reports completed with external planning justification report outlining why. So in the past, you would just see maybe a building permit for that without the justification of why, and the reduced setbacks and Lake Simcoe Regional Conservation Authority permit. In this process, because it is an all-in-one one window approach, it includes LSRCA, MNRF, the town's comments, all the geotechnical studies, or all the studies required beforehand. So when planning staff come to council with that recommendation report of that yes, no, it is well vetted beforehand. And in the case of a boathouse, that would be meeting the entire standards of the document. You could imagine that we are seeking council's permission just to say yes or no on the use of the boathouse for those lands. So, and just to maybe elaborate on that question a little bit further, is that if you had a reduced size boathouse on the land and it met all the standards and setbacks as outlined in the document, we would still have to come to council to ask the question, can this land have a boathouse? Yes or no? That's where it's coming from. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Councillor Van Berkel.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I agree with that. I agree with boathouses. Boathouses are the evil, as far as I'm concerned, on a lakeshore. If I had my way, there wouldn't be a single boathouse in the water, and even some of them that are on land, you know, but that's not what I'm talking about. Just the problem is with you know, people that want to put on addition, a veranda, a deck, whatever. I mean, I know it's a one-stop thing, but it still goes through 5 or 6 different departments. And, you know, and I hate to say this, but it's true because I've gone through it. Our departments, they don't seem to communicate with one another. And that's one of the biggest problems. You know, you go there, it's done, you go back, oh, but the other department wants something else. It's never done. It's never done. It's always, you know, something else needs to be done. And then you get another bill for, you know, $2,000 or $3,000. I mean, there's got to be some common sense here. You know, we need to protect the lake, and I agree on the boathouse thing. It's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, you know, the people that want to build or improve on their houses, additions, verandas, decks. What's
Okay,
the big deal? It's there.
Well, let's walk through that then, Councillor. So, Mr. Scarrett, like, what if somebody with a shoreline property wanted a deck or a veranda or an addition? What's the process?
Through your worship, to Councillor Van Berkel, I'm glad he brought up these scenarios, because this is really the heart of the one window approach. In the past, typically someone would have to come into town hall, apply for a building permit, and then go down to Newmarket and apply for a Lake Simcoe Regional Conservation permit. And then each regulatory authority would look at those drawings that may not match and approve them under their own regulations. So then when the building inspector gets on site, he sees a differential between the approved Lake Simcoe Regional Conservation Authority plans and possibly the town's approved plans. This one window approach allows developers to come to one location, town hall. We do all the legwork of circulating to those agencies. It's one drawing that all agencies are looking at. So a streamlined approach, reduces costs, and speeds up development with one drawing type. So when it gets to building permit stage, we've already had those digital submission drawings in place in our system that are easily circulated to everybody, and the building department are already reviewing that. Again, the zoning bylaw and all the other documents down the line did not have the ability to help regulate development on the land or on the shoreline. So if someone was coming in for a veranda, they would require a shoreline permit, which we've improved processes as it's only been in place for about a year. And we are looking for about a 2 to 3 week turnaround period for those permits. Now, we are still working out some of the kinks of that development process, but we are very confident and happy with that approach. So it is a far superior process than has been in the past by having the applicant run around to all these other agencies and delivering these paperwork, when we can do it right from our digital submission process.
Thank you. Just before you go, Councillor Van Berkel, so one of my suggestions would be to suggest that Mr. Scarrett, Mr. Cannon, and Mr. Councillor Van Berkel get 2 or 3 of these people who are phoning him, who've got examples of maybe what they went through, and get on a Zoom call and get direct input from them, and see if there's something that is that can be improved, or if there is an issue, or if there's something that can be explained one way or the other. Councillor Van Berkel.
Thank you, Your Worship. And that's really a good idea. The one window approach, I don't have a problem with that, if that's what it was, but there's still 5 departments it's got to go through. And somebody should coordinate these 5 departments to make sure that they work, you know, with one another, and that they communicate. This is where the problem lies. You know, not one of the department goes to the other department to say this is done, you know, it's complete. It's always it got to come back for something else. On top of that, there's never a price on it. We just get we get a bill. That's it. We don't know what it's going to cost. I mean, somebody like I can give you a perfect example for a 35,000 square foot addition that costs $30,000 to the planning department and the building department, which is crazy. Great. I can give you another example. The Legion costs us almost $100,000 for a $300,000 addition.
Yeah, but the Legion wouldn't have gone through this process.
They did go through this process. They went through everything. They went through planning. They went through geotechs. They went through topols. They went through grading plans. They went through everything. The whole thing.
No, but our shores, they're nowhere near the.
Well, it's the same thing as the Our Shores. That's what we're talking about.
Okay. Okay.
And those are my problems. That's my big problem. If people came in and said, look, I want to build an addition on there, they're putting them through hell. They're making them go for geotechs, the whole thing, grading plans, swales, everything, for something that's been there for 50, 60, 70 years. And they want to put a couple of piles or something in to set the addition on. Why do you need a geotech? You're not disturbing land. You're not digging. Why do you need topols? I forgot. I'm sorry. There's a drain out of your eavesdrop going on to the land. Well, there always has been one. It's just crazy. And
Councillor, I'm going to have to ask you just to take a breath for a minute. We're going to get you some answers.
This is something that I get every day because I was in this business for many years and everybody knows me and I get it. And you know what? Nobody cares. Nobody cares.
That is not true, Councillor.
I'm sorry, I'm not talking about you.
So I know, but I'm not talking about our staff either. They certainly do care. But we will.
But I have told them 100 times and nobody listens.
We will ask Mr. Kane if he wants to add something at this point.
Yes, I love our staff. I really do. And I think they all do a great job. And I'm not picking on them. But you know what? They got to pick up and they got to, work this out. They have to really work this out because it's a problem.
Mr. Kane.
Thank you, Worship, and through to Councillor Van Berkel. We certainly hear the passion, Councillor, and I've certainly heard those comments before. There's a couple different processes in play here. One is, one is the traditional site plan approval process, which the Legion went through that process. It looks similar, but it is a different process than the Shoreline process that we're talking about right now. But there are similarities to some of the points that you made. With respect to the not caring about the process piece, I don't want to appear defensive, but there is a genuine desire to make things better. Nick and Mary and their teams have been actively working towards mapping out those processes, and they're right now nearing the end of improving those and improving the coordination more than what we already were. So I think council, when we complete that process, we can provide an information memo to council just to identify what those changes and improvements are, but they are in place or about to be in place, and it's certainly something that we're taking to heart. So rest assured that we are trying to do that. With respect to the current topic at hand in the community planning permit system, the invoicing costs and the billing costs, again, that's something that can be an issue for certain projects. Not this council, but a couple of councils ago now, made a decision through the budgeting process to have those people that were utilizing the town services pay for those town services. So is it fair for the average taxpayer to be paying for someone to process a boathouse application in this case? So it did go to a user pay system because of that philosophy. Certainly we try to reduce those costs by having pre-consultation with individuals, property owners, as well as their development teams. It shouldn't be a surprise that some individuals and development teams are more advanced and capable than others. So if you have someone that's inefficient, who is adversarial in the process, and those processes get dragged out, and the costs escalate accordingly. At the same time, we've had great examples, with one or two submissions that go through, quite easily and more cost effectively. So, that's a byproduct of the system. If that's something we have to look at, then, certainly we can look at that moving forward. And that's all I have to say at this point in time. I did get cut off before and I apologize. I promised I paid my internet bill, but you wouldn't know it. But yeah, I'm here to answer any more questions as required.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. And yeah, we've had a ton of internet issues today, so you're not alone. I'm going to Council Waters and then back to Councillor Van Berkel.
Thank you, Your Worship. We learn from history in terms of, how we move forward. I think the one window approach is a good idea because it houses all the decisions at one location where, you only have to talk to one person to give you the answers you need. So I think we've moved beyond the going to Lake Simcoe and all that kind of stuff. I think that process works out really well. But the reason, we have requirements for drainage plans now because Innisfil has a serious issue around drainage problems. And we have a number, my biggest problem up here, and I'm sure Bill's is that the impact of flooding that we have. So we build these processes into our permit plans because they're absolutely necessary. You need a geocheck. If you're going to be putting a pile on the ground, Bill understands you need to know what's underground before you start doing that because it could, you don't want buildings falling on themselves. So you require these things depending on the construction process that you're using. But what I might suggest is that a review of how well the process is working, 1 year after it's been implemented. Okay, so making sure that our MORE system tracks all the issues that Councillor Van Berkel was mentioning. Track all these comments and then do a review at the end of the year to see whether or not, what are the issues that we're still seeing in the permitting process, and then try to address those down the road. So I think that would be a good way of addressing Councillor Van Berkel's issues around the issues that he's hearing about. But at the same time, I think the shoreline is absolute must. We need to protect it. And I've seen some absolute monstrosities on the lakefront in terms of, taking up more than, 60% of the surface area of the shoreline. And some of the things we've allowed on the shorefront, are absolutely crazy. So I think a review down the road, just in terms of how's the new process working, and giving us some feedback at the end of that. And if we have to make some changes to the process to either quicken those, reduce the costs for those homeowners, I think it is something we can do down the road. But I think the one window approach is a much better system than we had before. And I think it will only improve the efficiency and the costs and also the impact of building along the shoreline. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Back to Councillor Van Berkel.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Alex, for your comments. And I'm not complaining about what our process, what our one window process. I'm complaining about cost and time, and I'm complaining about time mostly because it's taken up to a year and a half for people to get a permit, and that's not acceptable. It really isn't, And I know that you have to go through a planning process, and I know that you got to go through a building department, and I know that you got to. For a lot of stuff, for a lot of buildings, the big buildings. If you're going to build, a $5 million house, I agree. All this has to be done. And it should be done. I agree with that. And again, as far as boathouses, if I had my choice, there wouldn't be a boathouse on the lake. But it's the little things, to keep the small guys working. There's more small entrepreneurs on this lake that build decks, that, do small additions, do verandas, do whatever, They can't afford to sit for 3, 4, 5, 6 months and not do anything. We need to help them. We are, we're the ones that make the laws. We have to help them, and we have to smoothen out the process for them. And that's all I'm asking. I'm not picking on anybody, any staff or anything else, because, I know they're very diligent in their work, and they work hard at it. Nick, I love Nick. I worked with him for many years, and but we need to have more than one process here. I agree with the law. I agree with all of it, but not for these little things. I think we need to, come up with some way, somehow, that we can keep these people working as well. And that was, those are my concerns, and those are the phone calls I get. I don't get phone calls from people that build 100 houses or $5, $6 million houses. I get the calls from the little guys that want to work, especially right now during this pandemic.
Thank you. So I think maybe at the end of this, this isn't a formal, we're just going to accept it, but maybe we can get a sit down with these little guys that are calling you Bill, and with Nick and Chris and Mary, and go through it in a more detailed than we can go through it here in this setting, where you can like pull out the invoices and pull out, okay, this is when we applied for the permit, this is when we got the permit, there's the bill that went with it, and just work through all of the minute details that, you know, we really don't have the ability to do sitting in this session. And I saw another hand. Sorry, it was Councillor Nicol.
Your Worship, I think you may have touched on it there. I just want to check, make sure I hadn't misunderstood. I believe that we were just getting a refresher on the bylaw, you know, ahead of anticipated applications that will be coming into council. I didn't think we were going to get into debating the bylaw or the process or the fees, and if there is something that needs to be added to the recommendation, just to get a report back on how the process is working, maybe that's something that could be added. But I didn't anticipate that we were actually debating the bylaw itself or whatever process or wherever abstracts may have been a part of that. So that's why I was just getting clarification, but I think you've already answered that for me. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, but I think it's good if these things are obviously bottled up, let's get them out there and deal with them. And so is there any amended recommendation other than receive for information for this educational workshop? Mr. Scarrett.
Through your worship, and I'm very excited about these comments, and the town is open for virtual business. So we want to keep those applications coming and listen to our stakeholders, right? They're a very important part and why we are actually here today, right? So we want to make sure that everybody has a voice, and if they have any concerns about the process or need further clarification, by all means, staff are on standby to have a Zoom meeting or an email or a phone call. Our lines are open. Be more than happy to open those doors and listen to our very valued public.
Great. So we'll action that then. If I don't think we need a recommendation to do it, because it's not really on this topic, because I think Councillor Van Berkel's talking about more than just the shoreline permitting process. I think he's talking about other, the site plan and others as well. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have one kind of burning question, and I'm hoping staff will be able to answer it. And I have the same opinion as Councillor Van Berkel, and that's that if another boathouse was never built, I'd be quite happy about that. But I would like to know is that how is it that people that live on the shore can expand their property onto Crown land, which goes underneath the lake, and we allow that in terms of A, it's not their property, B, we allow them to put a building on it, and do they pay taxes on that expanded property that they now have? So if just for edification, since it's an education workshop, I wouldn't mind understanding the rationale in terms of how we allow that to happen.
Thank you. I'm not sure we have any tax people with us tonight, but who wants to tackle that question? Nick?
Through your worship to Councillor Waters, great question. This document regulates on land and in water up until the middle of the lake. So those development standards are far-reaching. It doesn't take into consideration that it's on Crown land or not on Crown land. You still have to adhere to the development standards within the document. I was in a meeting last week with Lake Simcoe Regional Conservation Authority, who are amending Chapter 6 of their regulations so it would better regulate or prohibit the expansion of the shoreline farther out into Lake Simcoe. So working with the Conservation Authority has always been our mandate to keep this one window approach and to help regulate that development on the lake and on land. I cannot speak on behalf of the tax piece, but hopefully that helps answer your question, Councillor Waters.
Thanks. And I can speak, I think, on the tax piece, because the taxes, MPAC, the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, would assess it based on the value of the home. So I would imagine having, added to the value of the home, that means that their taxes would be higher. But that's just my layman's answer to that. Does anybody else have anything to add? Councillor Waters?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I still haven't heard the answer to is that if I owned a cottage property or owned a property and there was Crown land on the other side of the street, or there was a Crown land next to me, that I could get a permit and build on Crown land. Here we're doing basically the same thing. We're allowing people to build on Crown land they don't own. It belongs to the Crown, but we're still allowing them to build that building. And I remember somewhere there was mention about a boathouse that was being built, about the MNRF giving the rights to a landowner to own the land underneath his boathouse. So I guess I'm just confused in terms of how we can allow people to build on Crown land when I don't think I would be allowed to do it if it was adjacent forest land next to me, but we're allowing it in the water.
Thank you. I think it is a bit of a legacy piece here too, because some people do have deeded rights out to us so far and some people don't. I remember looking at a Shoreline map years ago that that showed that, just based on how long you'd owned the property. Mr. Kane?
Yes, through you, Mayor Dolan, to Councillor Waters, you are correct. There is a handful of properties that do have deeded access to the bed of the lake, and they are the exception. I think we probably have around a couple of dozen of them scattered in clusters along Kempenfelt Bay and further south down towards Lefroy and Guildford. Further Councillor Waters' comment, it is a legacy piece with respect to use of the lake in Crown land. It is, provincial legislation and some common law that, allows for reasonable use of Crown land in proximity to properties that are fronting water bodies. What this bylaw attempted to do was, in a scenario before where, the town didn't have any control over, that M&R reasonable use process, what we're trying to do now is to capture and apply, our interpretation of reasonable use. And if those areas are going to be allowed to be used by the province, then, how can we locally influence that through the use of the CPPS? So, it is us working, with the rules that are in place by the province. And yes, it can seem frustrating. I recall there being comments, about other boathouses about, this privatization of the lake and, excluding it for use by other members of the public. But there is precedent and legislation that allows for that to happen. And the idea of the CPPS is to keep that truly reasonable and acceptable from a community's point of view.
Thank you.
Other questions? Councillor Van Berkel?
Just a comment, Your Worship, to follow up on Councillor Nichols. The next time that we have a community or an educational workshop and you don't want us to argue the bylaw, don't put the entire bylaw on the agenda because it's there.
That's fine. We have the time. This is a good time to do it when it's not a regular council meeting, and we can have discussions. And because it's a workshop, it does provide us more latitude than our procedural bylaw would normally allow us. So, but we've had good discussion, and I think we have a direction. I just wondered, Councillor Waters, did you want to, I don't know if tonight's the night to do it, but did you want to add that piece about the review after a year, or?
I think it would be a good opportunity to, or a year down the road to get some feedback, whether it's positive or negative, about how the process is working. So I'm not too sure if that requires a motion or whether or not we just ask staff to build that into the schedule.
Mr. Scarrett?
Through you, Your Worship, to address Councillor Waters' question, and I'm sorry I didn't answer that earlier. The bylaw came into effect from LPAT in January of 2019. Having a new document in place with a large variety of developments that are under it requires it to have some time to go through those processes. The end of this month will be our very first Class 1 permit coming to council under this process. So it's already been a year and a quarter for us to even see our first ever Class 1 permit. With the current pandemic and us possibly missing the first full summer season for this document as a new document, it might be difficult for us to report on a logistics standpoint of the effectiveness of the document at this time. But however, we will report back to council with updates on us reviewing the document and making those necessary improvements along the way.
Is that acceptable, Councillor Waters?
That's understandable, considering the situation that we're in. But as long as there's a review and that we get an update at some point in time in the future about the process and how things are going, that would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, thank you. I think for a lot of reviews and stats, we're going to have to erase the year 2020 out of the mix because it'll skew so many stats. Anyone else? Councillor Van Berkel?
Sorry, Your Worship. I apologize to staff. I mean, you know, this has been on my chest for a long time because I get these calls, and I think you guys do a great job. You know, I'm not picking on you, believe me. Just that I get the calls, and you know what? You came here tonight to educate us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Van Berkel, and thank you for educating us. Councillor Payne.
Thank you, Your Worship. But just a question. Is it possible to have the same type of workshop, education workshop for the residents who are considering building a structure like that? That everyone that lives on the waterfront knows what they can or cannot do. So have we had anything like that, or is there something that we could have like that?
Mr. Kane?
Yes, Your Mayor, and through to Councillor Payne. We haven't had anything like that recently. It's certainly always an option for us to reach out and communicate for those public outreach pieces. During the actual development of the CPPS, we did actually have a technical working group, you know, where we had Shoreline residents and Shoreline contractors together to help us come up with this document. So their input has been embedded in the process to date. But, you know, to your point, if we think there's a benefit to, you know, going back out and educating on the finalized document, and maybe even at the same time getting some feedback on improvements, that's certainly something that we can explore and report back on.
Thank you. And we did do a number of pop-up workshops, and we did, there was at the farmer's market once, I remember, in the development phase. We had public meetings. So when we were developing it, we did a lot of that, but it is hard to get people engaged about something unless it absolutely affects them. So trying to get somebody to care about this, if they don't, say, live on the shoreline, or even if they live on the shoreline but they aren't contemplating any additions or development, it's really hard to get people to engage in something like that unless they're absolutely going to go through the process. But it's a good point, particularly to allow people who are contemplating, say, putting in a boathouse, making sure they understand all the steps that they're going to have to go through in order to, right from the get-go. Councillor Asadi, did you have something?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to follow up on the Our Shore Bylaw 062-17. When it was quoted, it was approved May 24th, 2017, and in LPAT January 8th, 2019. So if it takes all that time to have this bylaw in place, which is in place now, there has been reports before that have come to council that are being delayed, that will come back later with a recommendation for an amendment to the Our Shore bylaw. So what's required in timing, if it takes all this long to get this in place, how easy is it going to be to make an amendment to the Our Shore bylaw? And because I would think that that would be a difficult process. And what are the times? When are the times that we're going to need to make an amendment?
Thank you. That's good. So you'll recall the first, when we approved it, then it was appealed, which is why it had to go to LPAT. Mr. Kane?
Yes, through Mayor to Councillor Sadi. The heavy lifting was done, with the establishment of the CPPS. So, Councillor Van Berkel indicated earlier that this was the first CPPS in Lake Simcoe. It was the second one in the province, where we actually had staff helping us, from the township of Lake Base, sharing their experiences. So, a lot of the heavy lifting and policy work were done in the first round of this. Depending on how contested things are and, how much the public is engaged, to the mayor's point, we'll ultimately reflect on the length to amend it. But from a staff perspective, we think, amendments or improvements or tweaks to the bylaw will be a much less contested process and a shorter process, just given our knowledge and learnings to date and the fact that we already have something established.
Anyone else? Seeing none.
Sorry, Mayor, I didn't actually answer the question. So through Councillor Sadi again, a typical zoning bylaw amendment that, wasn't heavily contested, could be something that, would go through, a review process, around a 6-month window compared to, the years it took to do the initial CPPS bylaw.
Councillor Sadi.
Thank you. Just follow up. So then, Mr. Kane, then it would be because you're making amendments because you feel that those would be situations to improvements to the Our Shore?
Mr. Kane?
Yeah, through your worship to Councillor Sadi, as Nick mentioned earlier, every bylaw tries to address, 90 or 95% of the cases out there, but, every site is different. Every application teaches us something different and, requires interpretation of matters that, which we may not have contemplated before. So, yes, to answer your question, the bylaw, at the learnings that we've taken from the bylaw and certainly any feedback that we got from the public would be embedded into, would form the basis of that improvement to the bylaw. So, it could be processes, it could be provisions that we know are problematic or, have unintended consequences. So yes, the learnings from, the last, 18 months, and, from the public engagement and from workshops like this would form the basis of that amendment to improve the bylaw.
Anyone else? Thank you. And so I need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation to be received. Councillor Waters and Councillor Ices, all those in favor? That's carried. I want to take the opportunity on behalf of council to thank Mr. Cannon and Mr. Scarrett and Mr. Kane and I see Ms. Nordstrom's there too, but turned around. So thank you all for doing this. I think this is a really good opportunity while we have this extra time and nobody's going anywhere to have some updates on different policies, bylaws, procedures. And I would suggest to council, if there's any areas you think we need another a 101 on, if there's areas that trip you up or you just think we need a little bit of extra time on, please send me an email and we can certainly do some of those in the future if you'd like. Okay, so the confirming bylaw is moved by Councillor Van Berkel and seconded by Councillor Fowler. All those in favor? That is carried. And adjournment, Councillor Nickel and Councillor Waters. Thanks everybody. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll have our regular council meeting for those that are on the live stream. Please join us next Wednesday for our regular council meeting. We've got a packed full agenda and we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.